Good morning or afternoon, and welcome to the Gemini warehouse, complete with cats. Yep, today you're with me and four cats. And sadly, Lioness can't be with us today. But first things first, let me turn off Iron Maiden. You know, as much as I love Iron Maiden, sometimes, yeah, there we go. Iron Maiden, absolutely brilliant band. If you don't listen to Iron Maiden, shame on you. You should listen to Iron Maiden. And indeed, on my channel, the words should, would, and are law. So hello, and first things first, apologies about the having to reschedule a live stream from last night. Something came up last minute, and I had to prioritize, and I just couldn't, ignore what was going on. So I had to basically just reschedule. But it's fine. I just looked at it and thought, you know what, I've got today off. It's a Sunday, and I thought I'll just do a live stream during the day. Usually I do live streams at evening time, usually with beer and stuff. And I thought, whatever. Let's just be a little bit different. Break the mold. Diversity and difference is our strength. So we're told, depending on who you listen to. So with me today, I've got my cup of cocoa. I usually don't drink cocoa. Tea. And very, very rarely coffee, but I have to very much be in the mood for coffee. But today I just thought, again, being a little bit different, why not? Second thing I'll apologize for is I probably look a little bit of a state. And that's because the first thing I did when I got up this morning, I went for a run, had a shower, and being a DOS Sunday, I was like, you know what, I'm not actually going to make much of an effort to worry about my appearance. And being a guy, we're not really that big on appearances anyway, so sorry I'm not looking like the best of myself, but it is what it is. I'd rather be hated for who I am than loved for who I'm not. So getting down to business, the purpose of this live stream, I put out a poll recently again on my channel about what kind of videos we should do for the live stream. And the one which came out on top was what makes a good martial artist. This is a subject which I have thought about a few times actually in recent months. Indeed, like what is a martial artist and what makes a so-called good martial artist. The other options which I had on the channel, again, a bit like the previous live stream, we ended up talking about a topic which wasn't my particular favorite, but most people voted for it. So I was like, fair enough, I'm going to honor the Democratic vote and let's talk about what most people want to hear. Same with this. I mean, I'm going to be honest, it wasn't my personal preferred topic to talk about, but most people voted for it. So I was like, you know what, we're going to talk about it. Again, just honor what you guys want to hear, as opposed to basically put out a poll and say, okay, let's do a poll, and it doesn't matter what you vote for because I'm going to talk about something which I want to talk about, which defeats the whole objective of having a poll, basically, or putting it to a vote. But anyway, that being said, what makes a good martial artist? So, as I said, this is something which I've thought about in the last few months, and especially, I suppose, with like the rise of social media in martial arts as well. What distinguishes what is a martial artist per se has very much changed from when I was learning martial arts. Back in my day, showing my age a bit with my grey hairs coming through, but you actually had to go to the gym, you had to go to the dojo, you had to go to the dojang and learn, physically learn. You had to, in order to actually gain the knowledge, you had to sweat, you had to spar, you had to roll, you had to invest time, money, and effort in order to get your money's worth, essentially, of becoming a martial artist. Part of that, I suppose, as well, if you're going outside of a physical sense, what one is learning from that is discipline. The discipline to turn up day in, day out, even on occasions when you really didn't want to train. And I feel we're all very much guilty of that. Every single practitioner I think I've trained with over the years has gone through moments where they don't necessarily want to train. They may not be in the mood for training. Other things could be happening in their lives. So for them, they're like, I'm going to come into the gym today, but quite honest, I don't actually want to be here. But that's where the discipline comes in. You're doing something which you don't necessarily want to do. Whereas nowadays with social media, it's very much changed. You could literally sit a whole day in front of YouTube and watch videos about forms, kata, pumsi, hanbon kurugi, free kurugi, you know, free sparring, techniques, strategies, and what have you. And you could actually learn almost like a martial art in an afternoon, which could actually be a topic for another occasion, actually. But point being is that it's changed how one does martial arts. Ultimately, like when I was a kid learning martial arts, like I said, you had to actually physically go to the dojo and learn the stuff. Whereas now you can sit down in front of YouTube and to all intents and purposes, you can almost learn a whole martial art basically from just watching YouTube. So with that being said, that has changed. That's changed how one learns martial arts and how one approaches martial arts. So added to that, surely if that has changed then from how one learns martial arts, surely then that has also changed what makes a good martial artist and what makes a bad martial artist. I feel maybe we should actually start this, and instead of actually saying what makes a good martial artist, we should actually say maybe what doesn't make a good martial artist, or indeed what makes a bad martial artist. So from my experience, I suppose, like what makes a bad martial artist, you could look at it from a number of perspectives. You could look at this from maybe like a physical perspective. Is a good martial artist somebody who can do, say, 1,000 kicks in 20 seconds and not even work up a sweat? And then you're looking at the physical side of it. It is what makes a good martial artist physically. You're basing it. It's like, okay, if you can do these amazing things physically, that must mean you're a good martial artist. Is that so? Or another perspective, you look at it maybe from the more holistic or philosophical perspectives and say, okay, so you could maybe not be good physically in martial arts, but you know a lot about martial arts history, you know a lot about martial arts philosophy, you know maybe the theoretical framework of most martial artists or most martial arts. You could have invested a lot of time in studying books like the I Ching. You could have spent a lot of time invested in studying stuff like the 5 pentagram approach, basically earth, fire, water, wood, metal, which are very prevalent in Chinese martial arts, but do have their place in martial arts which aren't from China as well. You find them in other martial arts, but they're just taught and phrased in a very different way. Yin Yang, you could have spent a lot of time like investing in Yin Yang philosophy or Tao, or in Chinese it's pronounced Dao, Taoism, if you want to Romanize it, philosophy. You could have spent a lot of time like investing in learning about this kind of stuff, but physically you may not necessarily be that good. With that approach, one could say, okay, martial arts isn't all physical. And indeed, it's quite often heard, or I've certainly heard it in my career, martial arts is not about fighting. So I think, okay, so that implies then that martial arts has some deeper meaning to it away from the physical side. What could that stuff be? Surely if it's not physical, then it's spiritual, which is the opposite of physicality, is the mental, the spiritual aspect, the holistic aspect, perhaps. So you could look at that and say, okay, that makes a good martial artist. Somebody who may not necessarily know how to fight, somebody who, when they do their forms or their kata, or indeed any sort of basics, kions, as they're known in Japanese martial arts, they're all over the place. But that doesn't matter because they have a good theoretical knowledge of what they're meant to be doing, which ties in a lot to like the forms aspect. People who do good forms is not necessarily a reflection of them being able to fight or even to spar, but it goes to show they actually have a good understanding of the theory of the techniques that they're doing. So one can say maybe that is what actually makes a good martial artist ultimately. You could actually reinforce that as well and say that the older one gets, they're going to lose their physical abilities a lot more. The older you get, you slow down. You're not as enthusiastic about training anymore. You generally put on weight. Recovery time takes longer. Aches and pains sit in, and that's the natural part of aging. So it's very rare you're going to get people like in their 70s or 80s who are going to be very good like fighters. But what they have behind them is a wealth of knowledge. So even if they're old and they're unable to fight or spar per se, does that mean that we should like completely cut them out as being a good martial artist? Something worth considering. Bear with. So another aspect as well, I suppose, which was running through my mind, and I suppose has always been running through my mind ever since when I first started learning martial arts, was like the more philosophy-based approaches. Or maybe I didn't phrase that correctly or appropriately, but it's more of like the transference. Yeah, I believe transference is probably the better word to use. The transference of the non-physical assets, but being able to transition those into your everyday life. And what I'm talking about here is stuff like discipline, the etiquette, the modesty, the perseverance, the self-control. All of those are tenets of Taekwondo. And at first, when I first started learning, I believed all of those tenets just applied to the physical side of stuff. I believed, okay, self-control. Let's take self-control for the sake of conversation. When I first started learning as a kid, I thought self-control meant that it was only meant to be applied physically, like in sparring. You're sparring at somebody who's beating you up. You want to beat them back, but that self-control comes in and says, like, no, don't do that. Exercise some restraint, exercise some of that discipline, and some of that etiquette, even if that other person doesn't necessarily deserve it, you feel. But being able to actually display that in sparring or in your physical stuff that you're doing, that's what I believed it was. Yet, that can be transferred, that's where the transference comes in, into everyday life. You could well be in public having an argument or a debate with somebody. They're becoming heightened, they're becoming very aggressive in their discourse, very belligerent. And it's tempting for you to then start shouting back. But you don't. You become calmer. And people who work in customer services, I feel, probably have a very large amount of self-control because of the abuse, the verbal abuse that we get on a daily basis from disgruntled customers phoning up. And yet these customer service people, they're always like really calm, they're polite, regardless of what's going on. So they're exercising self-control and discipline. So that is a martial arts tenet, which has been transference, over to everyday life. Additionally, then you think, okay, let's think about other stuff like perseverance. Again, when I was a kid doing martial arts, perseverance basically meant you're going to have to go for your black belt grading. And to get to your black belt grading, you're going to have to keep training and training and training and training day in, day out, even if you don't want to. And that's where the perseverance comes through. You're persevering to get to that black belt. So for me, again, a bit like the self-control, that perseverance for me was very physical based. You know, okay, I can do 10 press-ups on my knuckles, but today I'm going to persevere and I'm going to do 11 press-ups, and then tomorrow I'm going to do 12, and so on and so forth. But just what we said with self-control, that perseverance can transfer, or to use a Freudian psychoanalytic approach, transference into the everyday life. When you get to adulthood, and I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, life becomes harder. And if you're going to take a lyric from the band Megadeth, they said, the more seriously I took things, the harder the rules became. And I feel that's actually very true in life. When you're young, you don't really care. You just want to get drunk. You want to, well, I'd say I'm speaking from experience. I'm speaking from maybe my generation and what I observed empirically, observed from other people of my age and generation. They wanted to go out, just get drunk, live off takeaways, party, and have sex. And, you know, they didn't really think very much beyond that. Yet when they start settling down and having families and paying mortgages and bills, they have to become more serious. That's when you realize actually how hard life really is. You try to apply for a job, you realize you're more than qualified to get the job, and yet you get rejected, and you realize then that actually somebody else has gone for that job and they've got it, and that person you find out that they may not be as qualified as you, they're not as skilled as you, they may not even speak the same language as what needs to get the job done. And it's very, very easy in that way to become very disillusioned and very discouraged. And that's where that perseverance then comes in. Think, no, I'm not going to let this beat me down. I'm going to use this perseverance, which I've learned from this martial arts philosophy and the tenets, transfer it from a physical sense over into everyday adult life to persevere through these challenges. And that's where perseverance comes through. So one could say actually that maybe the good martial artist is actually one who's been able to appreciate these tenets from a physical side, recognizing that these tenets need to be transferred over into everyday life, specifically into adult life. Could be applied to child life as well. But we're talking from an adult perspective here. We could talk about the child development from a developmental psychological perspective another time. But basically, the good martial artist is one who's been able to recognize these tenets, transfer them over into adult life, and use them. Now, interestingly thing here is that no physical side is actually being used. You're not physically using your martial arts to get these goals. When you go for a job interview, you're not using your physical martial arts skills to beat up your interviewer and saying, give me this frigging job, and punch them in the face. But you're using all these other skills. You're using your perseverance. You apply for X amount of jobs, you get knocked down so many times. And believe you me, I mean, I've actually been in this experience in my lifetime as an adult where I've applied at various different jobs and all the qualifications I have haven't been enough to secure me those jobs. And you start looking at stuff thinking like, I'm becoming quite depressed by all these knockbacks. That's when that perseverance comes through and you're like, keep going, just keep going, applying, go back, adapt your CV, tailor your CV to the jobs you're going for, and then just keep going. And I believe it was Winston Churchill made a quote that said something like, success is going from one failure to another with no loss of enthusiasm. And it's that quote is pretty much the martial arts perseverance tenet, bang on the head. But likewise, I mean, it's not just the perseverance of martial arts, it's like take another discipline. For instance, discipline, when you learn martial arts, people say, quite often you hear from parents, I want my child to learn discipline. Will martial arts make you disciplined? Is that a misnomer? I did a video a few years ago on my channel saying, do martial arts make you moral people? Because another argument I've always come across in my time, people always say martial arts make you a good person. Fucking bullshit. I'm saying that like, it's not true. Martial arts will not make you a good person. Many of the most downright disgusting people I know in life are involved in martial arts. And we're not going to go too much into that because that's not the focus of this live stream. It's about a good martial artist. But point being, people say martial arts makes you a good person. That's not true. It doesn't. People could say martial arts teaches you discipline. And that could be debatable as well. Does it teach you discipline? Or have you learned the discipline from other areas? But has martial arts, what martial arts is doing is basically making you aware of that discipline approach. And it's just basically fine-tuning it. I mean, how could one transfer discipline in the dojo to everyday life? Now, I remember like as a kid when I was in my dojang, the discipline came from turning up to the lessons in a clean pressed uniform, dobok, day in, day out, and standing in your lines when you're called to attention, not speaking unless you're speaking to, which is something from the army days when I was in the territorial army. You did not speak unless you're spoken to. But being able to actually stand for X amount of time in your lessons, go through the lessons, don't complain about what's being taught to you, even if you don't necessarily agree with it. thank the instructor for sub-omnium at the end of the day, and come back the next day. That is the discipline. And certainly I remember as a kid, many lessons I did not like what I was learning at all. When I first started doing Kyokushin, I hated it because it took me out of my comfort zone. But the discipline then was to say that I'm going to come back and day in, day out, put up with this, put up with these people punching me in the sternum, punching me in the arms, kicking me in the thighs, stuff I was never used to. And part of me is like, screw this, the door's there. The discipline came in, it's like, no. It's like, be stronger than your strongest excuse. And then that can tie into everyday life as well. Life is full of ups and downs. Life is full of tribulations and trials and challenges. And as we said, like with perseverance before, you will become discouraged at times. You will become angry at life. Life is full of injustices. Life, one of the most brutal lessons I learned in life is it's very, very unfair. But being able to maintain that discipline that you learned from your martial arts, or at least was fine-tuned by the martial arts, to be able to transfer into everyday adult life. Say, I am going to get up today. You know, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to go for a run. And like I said at the beginning of the live stream, I woke up today. The issue that I had last night took a lot of my time, but woke up today and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go for a morning run. I really didn't feel like going for a run this morning, to be honest. I could have actually done with a bit of a lie-in, but I still said to myself, no, you've made a promise to yourself, go for a run. So I did. Went for a run, did my exercises along the beach, came back, made breakfast ready for the family. I pretty much had most of my day schedule done before the family had even woken up. That is that discipline which has come in. So the good martial artist being able to actually use these predicates in everyday life. One could actually argue that that's a good martial artist. But again, what I feel is quite important here is that none of that is physical. It's mental. Believing in yourself, having that mental strength to just go through, be polite and courteous and show respect when people don't show it to you. Because it's very tempting, like if somebody doesn't show you respect, to disrespect them back. But it's quite often it's those people who are disrespectful to you are the ones who actually need to be shown that respect. Anyway, let's see what Rob's got to say here. Rob, I haven't been ignoring you. I did see your comment pop up a little bit. I was just on a bit of a roll. Hey, first and foremost, thank you for coming. Rob says, I'm not disgusting. I shower every 2 years. Jesus Christ. You know what? That being said, actually, I haven't had a bath for 7 years. And that's a true story, because I don't have a bath in my place. I have a shower. I said at the beginning of the live stream, Rob, sorry, cats. I was saying at the beginning of the live stream, Rob, actually, apologize about having a very late reschedule last night. Something popped up which really did require my attention. I couldn't postpone it. So yeah, I'm sorry, but I said to myself, look, I want to still be able to honor the commitment which I said I was going to do. And that is where that discipline comes in again, I suppose. What makes a good martial artist? Somebody who maybe keeps to their promises. That being said, I never make promises. I don't make promises at work. I don't make promises to other people. And a lot of people could look at that and say, well, that's quite a negative thing to say, to not make a promise. But once you've made a promise, you've tied into an unwritten contract. And if for whatever reason you're unable to do it, like last night, like I said, I promised I'll do a live stream last night. And I wasn't able to fulfill that because something else came up which required my attention. That would have meant I'd have broken my promise. So I don't make promises. I'll do my best to kind of resolve things. If something comes my way, I'll say, I'll do my utmost with the power I have at that time to see this through. But I'm not going to make a promise. As a matter of fact, actually, before we move on, oh, no, sorry. Somebody was just like, liked and hearted one of my comments I left on another YouTube channel. Somebody had actually made a video which was very similar to a video which I made a couple of years ago, and they were just like commenting on it. So that's fair enough. As a matter of fact, that was actually about belts and grades, which kind of ties into actually what makes a good martial artist. Because another side of a coin, we've discussed about the physical side. Does being able to like fight 110 people with your little pinky, which is snapped in half, make you a good martial artist? Is maybe just having that knowledge of martial arts. You may not actually be any good physically at martial arts, but you may have like a plethora and a wealth of the knowledge and the theory and the history of martial arts. Does that make you a good martial artist? Does being able to actually, what we just discussed now, I appreciate it's quite esoteric, but is being able to transfer those core tenets, those behavioral tenets of martial arts into everyday life, does that make you a good martial artist? I did say earlier, actually, we were going to talk or touch upon the subject of what makes a bad martial artist. So we've discussed the possibilities of maybe what could make a... Whoa, Jesus H. Christ.
Sorry, are all the cats with you?
Yeah.
All of them?
Yeah, all of them. They're all up here.
Amazing.
Yeah, see, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Just want to check.
Okay.
Scare you. Sorry,
Oh, dearie me. Oh, jeez, now she's slamming the door in my ear. What did I do to deserve this? That's a bad martial artist. Let me have some cocoa. Okay. Okay, Robert has said, it's nice to kind of like actually get like other people's perspectives as well, because otherwise it's just me talking in an echo chamber, and I don't like that, because I've got nobody to debate with, I've got nobody to learn from if I'm just talking to myself, and all I've got to do is just agree or debate with myself. It's always nice to have debate with other people. Conflicts can be good in the right circumstances, but you can still show respect in conflict. Anyway, Rob has to say, for my blue belt test, it took me 16 times to kick the board. When I did break it, the board broke in 3 pieces instead of 2. Lol. See, that is the perseverance coming through. And yeah, I mean, it took 16 times, but at the end of the day, there is a Korean proverb, I believe, that says something like, okay, Japanese one, like fall down 7 times, get up 8. And actually what you've just done there, Rob, is actually you've just put that proverb into practice. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if it took you 16 times to break it. What matters is the fact that you did break it. And also, what's important there as well is that the fact that you didn't give up. Now, you are able to actually apply that perseverance, that determination, that discipline that we've just been talking about into being able to achieve that goal. So kudos to you, and well done on your blue belt test as well. I don't want to make assumptions, but I'm assuming you passed. So if you did, well done, congratulations. I'll have a drink for you from the mug. It usually takes me 16 times to break the board. Other people can break the board 1 time. Okay, well, consider this. You're not on the same journey as them. They're doing a different journey. And us humans, we have a tendency to do what's called the social comparison theory from psychology. And that's where we always compare what others can do to what we cannot do. It's a very natural tendency, and it's steeped a lot of the time in jealousy. And I'm not implying that you're jealous, but it happens like we see somebody break a board 1 time. It takes us 16 times to break the board. So we're looking at what they can do in comparison to what we can't. They can break the board in 1 go. Why can't I? I must be bad. What I'd like you to consider, Rob, is that you can probably do something first time that they probably take 16 times to do. And as we said before, like the fact that you keep coming to the lessons, you got your blue belt. Again, I'm assuming that you did. But from what you've told me before in live streams, you train regularly, you enjoy your training. You obviously get a lot out of your training for you to continue training. That in itself is a success, because many people, and I'll be honest, I'm actually one of these kind of people, I have been off to different schools as a black belt, and I've spent maybe like 1 or 2, maybe 3 lessons tops, and then I'm like, nah, whatever. So actually, you have shown more dedication than what I have. It was a test to ascend to high blue. Don't think any less of yourself for taking 16 attempts. If you're going to open up a safe at Fort Knox, Will the safe open up with just one turn of a dial? No. You'll have to take 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, maybe take another step back. Basically it takes more than one attempt usually to be able to get something. When I started working in adult mental health services, I was working in mainstream adult mental health, and I became quite interested in recovery work, people who are recovering from mental health breakdowns, recovery from alcohol or drug addictions. I didn't spend that long in recovery services, but what I learned there was that recovery was never just a straightforward A to B. Recovery would usually be a few steps forward, then you'd have to go back and, oh, let's go this way, but there's something in the way we're going to have to go around it. So the whole recovery journey was not just one straight line. It was all wiggly, piggledy, all over the place, backwards and forwards, up and down, left and right. And same applies with martial arts. Nobody ever got good martial artists. But you get people like Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Tony Jaa, Scott Adkins, Michael J. White, all these people who people look at and think, wow, they're amazing, physically good martial artists. What we don't see is how many times they probably fell over. What we don't see is how many times they got their asses kicked in sparring. What we don't see is how many times they became disillusioned and probably sat down and wanted to give up. And there's that scene from, I think it's Rocky 3. And yeah, sure, I mean, I know Rocky is it's fictitious and what have you, but the message from Rocky 3 I found was like very touching and very profound, because there's a scene where he gets beaten by Clubber Lang, and Rocky almost becomes, I think he actually says to his wife on the beach, he's almost giving up on training, and he's at the beach, and his coach Apollo is like, what's wrong with you, man? He's just like, you're done. And his wife goes up to talk to Rocky on the beach, and she's like trying to encourage him, and he turns around to her and he says like, I'm just done. It's like, I'm finished. And I feel as martial artists, we all go through that kind of process, or that period of our lives where we do look at stuff, we sit down and we're like, why am I doing this? What point is there to do this? I've got a family to feed. I'd rather be out there working, putting food on the table, paying my bills, making ends meet, as opposed to going out and do, I don't know, Kumsi Taeback for like 120th time to no effect and not getting anything back. And it's easy to kind of get into that sort of mindset. And I think all these people, what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is people who we look at and think, wow, they look really cool and good in their martial arts. We don't see how many times they've been through that journey. We don't see how many times they've probably sat down and put their head in their hands and probably cried, or they probably just looked around and thought, why am I doing this? I feel actually maybe what I've just said there is actually kind of like maybe saying that what makes the martial artist good is from that physical aspect. We look at people, their physical abilities, and say they're a good martial artist because they can do all this physically good stuff. But for them to be able to kind of accept that depression, embrace that depression, work through that depression, challenge that depression, overcome that depression, is also the sign of a good martial artist, because they're using those philosophical doctrines to overcome the challenge that they're actually going through at that moment. Of course, Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee were disillusioned. Kung Fu guys get knocked out in the UFC first round by Muay Thai guys. I remember, this was almost like 20 odd years ago now, UFC or MMA in the UK has only really been around for like the last 20 odd years. And I remember my first exposure really to like MMA was 2007. I had opened up my first martial arts school, my first professional martial arts school. It was called Shiva Soviet. And there's a story behind that name, which I may discuss in another video. But I'd opened up my martial arts school, and I was heavily invested in this martial arts school. I wanted to make it work, and my ultimate goal was to be able to teach martial arts full time. I was 19, so I was like full of beans, full of energy. My ADHD was basically like on ecstasy. It just, I'd sit down for like a second, I'd be like, no, boring. Let's go do something. Come on, let's spar. Ooh, yeah, let's listen to music and all this kind of stuff. I had no grounding, I feel. Point being, I was like in contact with huge martial arts circles back then. I was putting the name of Shiva Soviet out. I was approaching different schools for different stuff. 2008, got involved in like competing against different styles, whereas before it had always been Taekwondo. So 2007, 2008 was like a very transitional period for me. Not necessarily a good period on a personal level. There was a lot of darkness during those years, but from a martial arts perspective, it was very transformational. But I got exposed for the first time to MMA during that time, like 2007. And I was really in mixed thoughts about it. I could see and appreciate the sheer athletic ability of it. And again, being good martial artists, I saw these UFC fighters absolutely ripped, going for like round after round after round, being kicked in the thighs and all this kind of stuff. I'd never had any experience with like physical conditioning myself because my Taekwondo teacher was a shithead. Never taught me this kind of stuff. So when I saw this the first time, I was amazed by it. What is this stuff? What is this MMA? What is this UFC? Why do people put themselves into cages and glove up in these weird gloves and slug it out? That fascinated me, but at the same time, I was very much intimidated by it. I had been raised martial arts wise in a very traditional setting. For me, it was always a case of martial arts was do box. You had to wear belts. It was very kicking, punching. It was very striking. The grappling kind of stuff. I was aware of grappling stuff, obviously from like judo and jiu-jitsu and aikido and hapkido and stuff. But I never took them seriously. Now that was my own fallacy. That was my own naivety coming through. Sorry, one of the cats wants to go out. Bye. Mind your tail. Oh, you got cobweb on it. No, don't wee against the door. So, where was I? Got my train of thought now. Yeah, so I didn't really give grappling much serious attention. I thought it was an interesting sideshow, but I didn't believe it was like the core of many martial arts. And when I got exposed to MMA and UFC, I felt that traditional mindset, which I had been threatened, I believe is a good word to use. And it was almost like a wake-up call, and especially when I started doing Kyokushin a few years after that. Everything changed in my martial arts world. And I realized actually that a lot of what I've been taught beforehand was nonsense. And it woke me up so much on everything, on physical aspects, grappling, groundwork, but also just like physical conditioning and also other philosophies. And it's really only over the last few years I've really taken like philosophical aspects of martial art a lot more seriously into everyday life. You need to be a bad man to willingly fight another person in MMA. Yeah, I mean, I have at some point in my life, I have given it serious thought of like, go on, just for once, get into the cage and have like a full contact MMA fight. Probably get knocked out in the first round, but at least then I can say on my deathbed, yeah, I did that. I've been in the cage. I fought somebody. I was knocked out. I had concussion. I was in hospital for 6 months. Great times. But part of me just wants to do that for the experience. And they say when it comes to regret, you regret the things you don't do more than the things you do. So I don't want to be an old crippled man on my deathbed and be like, oh, I so wish I got into the cage that time. At least on my deathbed now, I can look back and go, yeah, I had my teeth knocked out, but it was fun. But a lot of kickboxers, Thai boxers, and BJJ wrestlers are more respectful than Budo TMA guys. Yes, I second that. I have found, maybe again, kind of going back to like discussing good martial artists and what necessarily makes a bad martial artist. Some of the most arrogant martial artists I've met, and I mentioned this earlier in the live stream, some of the most horrible people I've met my entire life have come from martial arts. Some of the most arrogant martial artists I've ever met have come from Taekwondo. And I feel as though I can get away with saying that because I come from a Taekwondo background myself. That being said, I've been involved in Taekwondo since 1997. So I was 9 years old. I've been part of 2 British Taekwondo national squads with the BTCB and Shundokon UK. I've competed in over 100 competitions. Most of those have been Taekwondo, not all of them, but most of them have been. I've been involved in Taekwondo circles for as long as I can remember. And some of the arrogance from Taekwondo is disgusting. And I'm not saying that other traditional martial arts or any other martial arts don't have this arrogance. I'm sure they do, and I have witnessed some on some occasions. However, I found, strangely enough, many modern martial artists are much more open-minded when it comes to other stuff, trying different ideas, trying different approaches, looking at things outside the box. I went to a summer camp over 10 years ago now, and it was predominantly a Japanese-based summer camp. The martial arts that were involved in this summer camp were modern martial arts, but they still had some traditional values. They still like to dress in gis and have the belts and have like a ranking structure. But their whole approach was very modern. And a lot of it was almost like Japanese MMA in a way. And I had one of the instructors who was like a 6th Dan in, I think it was like Kyokushin or a similar art to Kyokushin. He came up to me once and he said, "Could you please teach me some Taekwondo?" And I looked at him and thought, you're a 6th Dan. I'm a 1st Dan. Well, I was a 3rd, and I self-relegated myself to 1st a few years ago. But I had a 6th Dan Kyokushin guy who'd fought in the ring, who'd fought in boxing matches and stuff. He came up to me and said, "Could you please teach me some Taekwondo?" And I was like, my God, it's like, that is humility 101. It's like, I was like, yeah, like really squeaky voice. It was an absolute honor. And I ended up teaching him some techniques, which I saw when I saw him sparring other people later on. He was using these Taekwondo techniques, which I taught him. And I was looking, thinking, that, as a Taekwondo instructor myself, I was like, that is so humbling to see. And I was like, yeah, I was so humbled to see him using that. Likewise, on the other side of the coin, I remember about 10 years ago, I went off to train at an old training colleague I had, who I used to train with in the national team. I went off to her school, and I just wanted to go there. We're old friends, and I was like, look, I'll come along, and I just want to have a Taekwondo lesson as a student. The lesson was split into 2 halves. The first half, it was done by the instructor. Then she said to me, "Oh, I need to go off," and I know she had like a personal appointment to attend to. She was like, "Sam, would you mind taking the second half of the lesson?" And I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's fine." I mean, it wasn't what I signed up to, but I was like, "Yeah, I don't mind doing that. Thank you for trusting me." So I stood at the front of the lesson, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to teach this Taekwondo school 3 techniques. I'm going to keep it basic, and I'm not going to go too complex. I'm just going to teach them 3 things. I'm going to teach them the thigh kick, outer thigh kick from Kyokushin. I'm going to teach them the Superman punch from ITF Taekwondo. This was an Olympic school, and they don't use Superman punch. The third thing I was going to teach was going to be a technique I'd learned, ironically, from this Kyokushin guy who swapped ideas with me. And this technique was a groundwork technique where you actually, basically it's like an arm bar on the floor. So I thought, okay, I'll keep it basic. I'll teach this kind of stuff. See how people go with it. I could tell at the end of that Taekwondo lesson, none of the students liked what I had taught them. And I heard quite a few times in that lesson students saying, "We don't use this in Taekwondo." And that's the whole reason why I taught that stuff, is because it's not being used in Taekwondo. I'm not teaching you sports Olympic Taekwondo. I'm teaching you stuff you haven't been taught. So I'm going to teach you maybe some like full contact stuff, street stuff, the leg kicks, Superman punch, this arm bar on the ground. And yeah, just the pushback I received from that was like, yeah, we don't want to learn this because it's not Taekwondo. Likewise, a few years ago, I had a bit of beef with somebody online. I posted a video on social media of a technique from Pumsi. This technique itself is that, essentially. That. And it's from a Pumsi Sipjin, Pumsi Sipjin, which is a 5th Dan form. So that technique, the official explanation is that this arm is a high block, knife hand high block, Sonal Yogomaki. And this technique is a palm heel strike to somebody's jaw. I looked at this technique and I did a video where I said, okay, maybe we could bring this technique down slightly to the chest, and it will actually be a triangular push into your opponent's chest. And I tried this out with my training partner at the time. I said, could you come towards me and I want to do this technique, see if it works. And it did, and it pushed from back. So I did a video where I was like, I did a video where I basically said, look, this technique, the official guidelines says high block, palm strike. Look outside the box. It can actually be a push to the chest. So I posted this video, I didn't think anything of it. And I got this Taekwondo guy from Pennsylvania. And he basically was no respect in his comment. It was literally, I remember it started off with, you don't know this technique. Everything you've said about this technique is wrong. And it's like, okay, let's see what else he says. And he went on this spiel about, it was more attacking me, not the technique itself. He was basically saying, like, you don't know Taekwondo and words to that effect. And I sent a response. Basically, my first line of response was, when you have conversations with people, I think it's good you actually show some respect first. And basically, I just said, you may not have to agree with it. That's fine. I can live with that. But you're attacking me. What you're doing is source derogation. That's in psychology, where you're attacking who is saying something as opposed to actually attacking their argument. So I've just shown you this technique. I can show it to you on a person. I can do another video where I can actually do it on a person and push them back to verify my technique and to verify what I'm saying. This guy wasn't having it, and he sent off another response, and again, it was just like attacking me. And I was like, oh, fine, whatever, block. I don't block people on YouTube. If they leave a comment, I generally leave it, unless it's really, really stupid. Like, oh, you're a dickhead. And it's like, okay, there's no substance to that. My dick's nicely between my thighs. It always has been, it always will be. I don't see anything changing. But if they put a comment like that, then I'll delete it. What this guy did next, the very next day, there was another comment on the same video of mine by a different person, but they literally said almost the same thing, word for word, verbatim. And my response to this was, you know, you've left a comment, some guy left a comment yesterday, almost the same words that you've done. I was like, I'm having a suspicion now you actually are that same person. You've got like a troll account. They came back saying like, yeah, I know that person. They're my best friend. So I was like, right, okay, so what this guy I suspect has done, he's really taken umbrage to me. He doesn't like my thought process. So he's gone around to his friends and said, oh, look, there's this guy called Gemini-TKD Sam. He posts these videos. Comment on his videos and tell him he's an asshole. So anyway, I ended up blocking this person because I responded to them. They responded something back. And again, it was really nonsense. It was just like, oh, you're a fucking dickhead. I was like, whatever, block. But then I continued posting this video onto like social media, Taekwondo social media, Taekwondo Facebook groups when I used Facebook. And I was getting people from the Taekwondo community who didn't like this. And they were attacking me saying like, oh, you know, this isn't how Kukuwan teach Pumsi and all this kind of stuff. But all these people seem to come from this Pennsylvania conglomerate. They all seem to know each other. And I was like, this first guy who left this comment in my video, I reckon he'd gone around to all these martial arts circles and said, attack Gemini-TKD Sam. But point being is like, that was just, all this guy needs to do was just say, look, I can see what you're doing. Personally, I don't agree with it, but live and let live. That'll be fine. But for somebody to then like become really insecure about a technique, a stupid technique, to feel the need to get other people to essentially cyberbully or attempt to cyberbully me, it's so weird. It is so weird. And, you know, cyberbullies, when I read their comments, I laugh at them. I really do. It's like you're getting upset over a stupid channel with stupid videos, essentially. It's like, that, I believe says more about you than it does about me. Anyway, sorry, Rob, I see you're commenting actually, so let's read some of your comments. My Krav Maga instructor said TKD is better for defense and karate is better for offense. Yeah, I was taught the same thing, actually. When I first started learning Taekwondo, I believe it's because Taekwondo is for distance. Taekwondo is more aware of distance, and if you spar with somebody who does Taekwondo, if you move into them, they'll naturally move back because they won't have the distance to be able to use their legs. Taekwondo, I believe the kicks are generally more defensive. One of my favorite techniques of all time was the jumping back kick, which I always used as a defense. It was my trump card, no pun intended about trump. But I used to basically back off away from my opponent, which was luring them in. As soon as they came in too close, then I just jump up, do a jumping back kick, and I actually scored quite a few TKOs, technical knockouts that way. And karate, I'd say, yeah, generally much more hand-based, so it's a lot more offensive. Kyokushin, I'd say one of the weaknesses of Kyokushin I found from my experience was that it's too offensive. As soon as a Kyokushin kumite starts, they march in towards each other and just power into each other. I haven't seen that much defense from Kyokushin, and that's not to say that it doesn't exist, because it does. But I'd say Kyokushin is mostly like 80% offense, 20% defense, from my experience. Rob says, my TKD instructor teaches stuff. We don't stuff, S-U-F-F. We don't use in sparring. We spend 10 minutes on punches, palms, elbows, knees, low kicks, and some self-defense against chokes and arm holds. It sounds as though you're learning traditional Taekwondo. It's like how the original Taekwondo came about in the 50s and like the 60s as well. Yeah, because I mean they don't use that in like Olympic stuff. Even ITF Taekwondo sparring, it's a shame because we don't use like knee strikes or elbow strikes or stuff like this in sparring. Only the theoretical stuff, and when we're doing like the key-ons up and down the hall or self-defense. In which case, the best things you have in self-defense are your palms, are your elbows, because somebody wants to get in your space in the street. They're not going to fight you from a distance. They're going to be right up here. And if you try and punch somebody from this close, it's not going to work. So the thing to do then is just use your elbow, wrap up into headlocks, and so on and so forth. Wouldn't a striker want to learn some ground stuff since some fights do go on the ground? You'd think so. I mean, I love the groundwork. The groundwork which I learned from these seminars, and I went to one the following year, and it was just as intense. But I only learned a handful of groundwork techniques. That being said, the groundwork I did learn are some of the best techniques I've learned in my whole martial arts career. And they're stuff which I remember. And I've so wanted to do videos on my channel of the groundwork, but it's just trying to find a partner who's actually willing to get on the ground. The other current members of Gemini, the two other people in Gemini, absolutely refuse to go on the ground. So yeah, I mean, to be able to actually show these groundwork videos would have to be basically somebody who knows how to go on the ground and they know what to kind of expect. Because I would so love to be able to show you some stuff. It's filthy. It's pure nastiness, but it's so good. Sounds like we're advertising for porn. But yeah, I'd certainly recommend, if you've ever done groundwork sparring, it's a completely different kettle of fish. The first time I did groundwork sparring, I was exhausted after just one round. It is so, so different. I was talked out of ground fighting since cauliflower ear in some YouTube videos of wrestlers becoming completely paralyzed. Yeah, and like I said, it's a completely different kettle of fish. It really is. If you happen to find an instructor though who's competent, again, maybe like the good martial artist, he's competent in what he knows. He's experienced. He knows what to look out for. He's not just some cowboy who's like, yeah, I know some groundwork kind of stuff. He's actually somebody who knows what he's doing. Then you can learn so much. It's fun actually as well. What I love from my ground fighting stuff, it's fun because you're always engaged. Whereas if you're having stand-up sparring, you can distance yourself and like get some air and think about your tactics. When you're on the ground, you're continuously moving because you're always trying to get that dominant position. And a lot of it depends on what your opponent does. So your opponent could be on top of you and he's like trying to wiggle his arms around, trying to get you into like a certain hold. And you can see his arm fly out that way and you're like, opportunity. Then you grab it and you put it into a lock. It's fun. I remember when I first started doing groundwork, the instructors were like, liken it to a game of chess. If you like chess. Well, that makes sense. Floors are usually filthy. They're not meant to be filthy in the dojo or dojo. Mind you, when I first started my school, Shiva Soviet, the floor was absolutely disgusting. I mean, like I said, I mean, I could do a whole video about my first school, Shiva Soviet. It'll be a long video, but I promise you it'll shock you, it'll amuse you, it'll probably make you shake your head in just disbelief. So much happened at school. A lot of good things happened at school. In terms of like teaching me about leadership, in terms of teaching me how to run a martial arts school. I found the whole experience of Shiva Soviet it was a wake-up call. Yet at the same time, it wasn't plain sailing. You know, Shiva Soviet, I struggled very much. I mean, I was very young at the time. I was like 19 when I first opened it up. And things which, when I look back now, I think, would I do the same stuff now as an instructor? It'll be like, no way. I mean, as an example, one of many examples, when we sparred, we had no body armor to begin with. We had no shin pads. I don't think we had groin protectors. And in the first few months of us being open, we didn't have insurance either. So all of that was just a recipe for disaster in the sparring alone. That's not even saying the other stuff which happened in Shiva Soviet as well. Shiva Soviet was a very, very interesting, dark, depressing and aggressive part, I'd say, of not just my life, but my Taekwondo journey. But I could very well do a video about Shiva Soviet. I'll put out another poll. What do you want to talk about, Shiva Soviet or the day I watched the lame-ass Karate Kid movie with some fake Jeet Kune Do guy? Or what was the other option I put on my live stream? Something about eating sugar makes you retard. That stems from a comment I saw. Somebody left a comment on social media saying that if you eat sugar, you're a retard. And it's just like, sure. Is that a good martial arts instructor? As a matter of fact, you look at and think, if you get instructors who tell you this kind of stuff, is that good? Indoctrination in martial arts as well. If you get an instructor who's trying to indoctrinate you, you could say, most people would say that's bad. Indoctrinate you. You could have your own political opinions. I mean, for instance, I know we discussed about politics last time, Rob, but I could say have my opinions, political opinions about certain things. Does that give me the right to try and indoctrinate my students into my line of thinking on a politics perspective? I mean, I could be, for sake of conversation, let's say I'm a Republican, like a very, very deep-rooted Republican. I could go to mostly a Democrat area in the States and try teaching some kids out there martial arts. Will my political opinion start filtering through into the lesson, even subconsciously? Would I have a right to do that? Well, most people say no, because it's martial arts. It should be separate. And that's why I try to stay away from doing political videos. This channel is martial arts related channel. We will talk about politics in live streams, but because I always see live streams as being a bit more relaxed, but I'll never come out with a video and just be talking about world politics, UK politics, US politics, whatever like that, EU politics. It's not that kind of place. We say that for live streams and we just have some banter, but we'll never go in depth. Anyway, I hope this live stream has touched on and addressed actually some of the aspects of what makes a good martial arts instructor. I mean, we've discussed about the physical aspects. Does being able to be very physically able-bodied in martial arts make you a good martial artist? Does maybe the physical side not matter so much? Is it more kind of like how much knowledge you have of the history and the philosophy of martial arts and the theory? Does that make you a good martial artist? Or is it being able to actually apply the behavioral tenets of martial arts: discipline, perseverance, indomitable spirit, good manners, and being able to apply those and transfer those into everyday life and live by those, does that make you a good martial artist? We also discussed about the negative aspects of being a martial artist, or what makes a bad martial artist. So hopefully it's been able to address some of those points. This, I feel, is a discussion which could be discussed and debated ad nauseum. There's so much, and I don't feel there's actually any clear right or wrong. It's all interpretation and opinion as to what makes a good martial artist. I was 50 minutes late to the TKD lesson and unprepared since I didn't have my uniform. The instructor still gave me my blue belt though. Well done. I mean, I feel that actually says quite a bit about the instructor as well. And the fact that your instructor was able to kind of like see your perspective and your side of the conversation and take that into consideration. So I was bad martial artist on Friday. No. A bad martial artist wouldn't think to say that. A bad martial artist would be somebody who'd be like, oh, well, I've turned up without my uniform. So what? I once had a martial artist who turned up into my lesson and he was wearing this garish dobok. It was black and yellow and had all these stars and stripes all over it. Not like the American flag stars and stripes. It had like just stripes across the arm and it had stars down the trouser legs. And he assumed that that would be okay to train in. But then again, I've been part of schools where they wear black satin uniforms and stuff. I've even seen a pink dobok, a pink satin dobok. I would say I'm not judging, but that would be somewhat dishonest. Anyhow, I hope this video's shed some light onto that. I'll put out another poll sometime over the next few days of other ideas which I come up with, other things that have been brought up to me in conversation about different martial arts related topics, things we could talk about. We may even talk about Shiva Soviet, which I may not actually do a live stream. It may just be like a normal video I'll make about the whole time and life and times of Shiva Soviet, even the early days of Gemini maybe, because those were a little bit weird. But we shall see. In the meantime, Rob, thank you very much for joining. Go enjoy the rest of your morning. I appreciate in the States it's still morning time, so thank you for tuning in this Sunday. Go off, enjoy the sun if it's sunny on your side, and have a lovely rest of your day. Other person who's been in the live stream who's not said anything, I have noticed you are there. So thank you for joining again, unless you're my stalker. Really need to get over that. Yeah, I could do my next video about the stalkers. Yay! Anyway, guys, thank you both for coming. Thank you for listening to me going on about this topic. Stay safe, train hard, and keep listening to... Who have we not listened to for a while? Soundgarden. Yeah, keep listening to Soundgarden because they're the best band around. Peace out, guys.